Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Metaphysics, Book 1, Aristotle discusses four main fundamental causes, and he also discusses his predecessors in physics and metaphysics, how they understood the universe and the things in it in terms of these causes. And he faults them for having overlooked or underplayed, if not all of the causes, at least some of them. And one of the important transitions that takes place in his discussion is from accounts that began by looking just at material causes, what it is that things are made of, or the substrate that they all depend on and are modalities of. That was insufficient. So there were accounts that took that and then introduced another cause, which by convention we typically call the efficient cause. Aristotle talks about it as the cause which is the arche, the beginning, or the one that brings about motion, kinesis, or change, metabole in Greek. And this is an important new step in the account because, as he says, if you want to say that the reason why things are as they are, why they have the being they do, why they have the structure or properties that they do, that's not going to work for some things. You can't take a bed and say, well, the wood just grew that way, right? You're not going to get a bed from that. Nor are you going to get a bronze statue just from bronze itself or the nature of the universe putting things together in that way. So there has to be something else. And what Aristotle focuses on here is not just something along the lines of billiard balls running into each other. Those are efficient causes, right? A billiard ball that hits another one communicates a certain motion to it. You can say that that's an efficient cause. But efficient causality goes far beyond that. So if we think, for example, about a bed maker or a statue maker as a cause for the existence of the bed or the configuration of the bed or of the statue, they're taking a certain material and then they're imposing on it a certain structure or form or shape, a certain essence, as Aristotle would say, and they are communicating or imposing or causing something to be, right? There's a motion on their part or a change on their part that is producing another motion or change. So it's not just random things colliding with each other or mechanistically determined things affecting each other in this way that Aristotle has in mind. In fact, what he's really interested in here, and he takes his predecessors as being particularly interested in, is explaining something a little bit different. Why are things so well or beautifully arranged, ordered? Why do beautiful and well put together things exist at all? The Greek for that is eu, well, right? Or kalos in the adverbial form. Echein, to be in a certain way, to be in a configuration, to hold, quite literally. Why is that the case? And so we can bring in additional first principles to account for this. And he talks about three people in particular. He also does bring up Parmenides and a few other people in the course of this discussion. But the ones that we're really most interested in are Hesiod, And then more than him, Empedocles and Anaxagoras. What does he credit Hesiod with having done for us? He says, it might be inferred that the first person to consider this question, the question of why are things arranged in the way that they are? How do things wind up this way? It wasn't just the materials. What arranged them that way was Hesiod. And he said, or indeed anyone who assumed love, eros, or desire, epithumia, as a first principle in things. And he says, well, Parmenides would be an example of this. Then he goes back to Hesiod, and Hesiod in his poetry, Hesiod is a poet who's providing mythological accounts, genealogies of how things got to be. He writes a work that is, the cosmogony, right? And theogony. So he says, where he's describing the creation of the universe, Hesiod says, love she created first of all the gods. First of all things was chaos made, and then broad-bosomed earth, and love the foremost of immortal beings. So love is not the very first thing, but once love shows up on the scene, love arranges things. Love makes things happen. Love introduces something new to the order of or rather chaos, the just material stuff and willy-nilly of the universe. He goes on, and then he starts talking about Empedocles. Now, Empedocles, if you remember, thought that there were elements, basic building blocks of matter, and to the water and air and fire of Thales and Anaximenes and Heraclitus, Aristotle says that Empedocles adds earth, although he doesn't treat these quite as consistently as Aristotle would like. And Empedocles introduces two other things that provide an explanatory account for how all these elements get put together. So he tells us that, here we go, in view of this question, why is it that there are, in some respect, more bad things and common things or base things than there are good and beautiful things? Empedocles had an answer to this. He introduced love, or friendship is another way to translate it, philia, a common bond that holds things together, and strife, nekos, contention with each other. He introduces these as explanatory principles. So when things are beautifully arranged, it's because love or friendship harmonizes all of these things or elements or forces together. And when there's disruption, when there's chaos, when there's ugliness, when there's sort of a discordance and conflict, that's because strife introduces that into these things and makes them not fit in well with each other. Aristotle says this really doesn't provide us that great of a account, but what's kind of interesting in it is he says it would be correct in a sense to say that Empedocles spoke of evil and good as first principles and was the first to do so. That is, if the cause of all good things is good itself. Now, Anaxagoras, he talks about in passing, but Anaxagoras introduces yet another way of looking at things, another principle, mind, nous. Intellect is another way of translating that as well. And according to Anaxagoras, mind originally arranges everything. He says that, Aristotle says that Anaxagoras avails himself of mind as an artificial device. He calls this a mechane chrestai, right? He uses it in that way to arrange the universe, to put everything in order, cosmopoion, right? And then he says, unfortunately, once he introduces this account, Anaxagoras will talk about anything other than mind as being the causes of things. So he uses mind to get everything arranged at the beginning and then he forgets about it later on. Coming back to Empedocles very quickly, he says that Empedocles differed from his predecessors by introducing a division in this cause. A division not just in the material cause, but in the efficient cause. Two types of them, friendship or love and strife. Now, Aristotle thinks that all of these accounts are defective in some ways. The biggest problem is that they don't take account of what he calls the final cause. Now, that's not completely unique to these thinkers. As a matter of fact, Aristotle thinks that nobody has really discussed the final cause adequately by comparison to himself, and he's going to introduce a lot of key characteristics of it. But with respect to these thinkers, he says that what they do is they assume that mind or friendship is some sort of good thing, and he thinks they're completely right about that. But then they view them just as the origins of motion. They treat them as efficient causes. They get things started, but there's no realization that there's another key function to this cause. He says, nothing is, in their accounts, nothing is or comes about for the sake, hos heneka touton in the Greek, of this great good, whatever it happens to be, friendship, mind, love, desire. So there's no conception of it being the final end or good. Instead, it's just the originator of motion, and we're left with a rather defective account, one that can't sufficiently explain why things are the way they are, as Aristotle is looking for in his Metaphysics.